Hey everyone, welcome to the third of a series of three writing workshops for the veterans writing community. We are starting about 30 minutes early to allow anyone to kind of trickle in and to allow time for anybody that wants to read some of their writing. So we're going to be kind of silent for a little while, but if anybody has anything they want to share, feel free to pop in and share. Workshops for the veterans writing community. We are starting about 30 minutes early to allow anyone to Hello, everyone. We are in a holding pattern right now, waiting for the workshops to start. Right now, we have started a little early so that if you have something that you would like to share, you can come into StreamYard to share. There is a link available in the chat windows. So if you do have something you want to share and you're not currently in StreamYard, if you follow that link, you'll come to StreamYard. And then what we ask is that you share your piece and then you back out of StreamYard. What we find is that there are a limited number of seats in StreamYard, and we can only fit like 6 people in here at a time. So once you have shared, we'd like you to back out just to provide that space available for anybody else.
Can't handle it. Sorry.
Okay, but I'm not going to look at it right now because she's trying to hold it back too, and this is going to be bad if we all lose it.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. I says you're okay.
We can't hear
everyone
you, Debbie.
You can't hear me? Okay, wait a minute.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. It says on here that everyone can see and hear you. Okay. All right. This poem was inspired like 19 years ago from a friend I have where I met teaching preschool, who's all her children are out of school now. They've all graduated. She's adopted white, biracial, and African American kids, and they're just a beautiful blended family. And I was driving home from Columbus one day where she adopted the last one, and this poem just started flowing out of me in the car. I wasn't driving, but I was writing it down as it came to me. But it's called "My Precious Child: A Conversation with Jesus." If my birth mom really loved me, then why did she let me go to be part of another family? Oh, Jesus, please tell me why, because my young heart needs to know. Didn't she want to get to know me? Didn't she want to watch me grow, to see the person I'd become? Oh, Jesus, please tell me why, because my young heart needs to know. Oh, my dear and precious child, said Jesus as he smiled. Your birth mom had tears like the falling rain, because giving you up caused her so much pain. But she wanted you to have the very best care, so she closed her eyes and came to me in prayer. Lord, everything's so cloudy, and I am filled with fear. Please ease the guilt I feel within, and let your answer be clear. So you see, my precious child, said Jesus as he smiled. She loved you enough to give you life, but for reasons you can't understand, she wasn't able to take care of you. So for you, I had a different plan. I called upon a special couple and asked them to love you as their own. So they opened their kind and caring hearts and brought you into their home. A home where they've taught you all about me, where they've cared for and loved you unconditionally. They've shown you by example how to follow my way, and oh, how I love that they taught you to pray. So, my dear and precious child, said Jesus as he smiled, just look inside their hearts, and you will see the reason you turned out so beautifully. And as you close your eyes each night, know that you are precious in my sight. Oh, Jesus, I want to thank you for putting my young heart at rest. I understand things better now and feel so very blessed to have such wonderful parents who bring me so much happiness. And I love them both with all my heart because Jesus, they're the best. Okay, that's the end. I'm gonna. Okay. Thank you for listening. That's,
Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. Okay, how do I get off of this now?
Well, Debbie, before you hop off,
Oh, okay.
no, it's okay. It's okay. I was just trying to piece together what I was thinking, and make it really coherent. You have a really strong use of rhyme, in your poem, and so it makes it, as the listener, it makes it, so that way I can look forward to how the line is going to form. Like, it's kind of like you can see an endpoint in the distance. How are you going to get to it? So that's something that can be really, really good and really challenging too. As a writer, let me say, I liked the subject matter of the poem, and I don't think I've heard anything like it, just because it's a difficult topic, and looking to address it in a way that can be comforting to a potentially upsetting topic, and especially with faith being one of the primary sources of comfort that people go to. It's really important. So I really applaud you in writing this piece. Thank you so much for sharing it with us too. The only thing I think would strengthen and like help you gain inertia in the writing, because it's a very even poem. right? And
Mhm.
that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if you were seeking to give a little bit more of the charge and the passion that would come with talking with somebody's savior or God, or the person who is important to them, having, and we'll talk a little bit about it in our later workshop on expressing emotion, I think it is, right? But I would really encourage some charged language in there, whether like charged language on the person who's asking, and realizing that there are different ways you can phrase a question that would make it more charged. And then, of course, there's a stark contrast when it comes to the querent, and the person who's asking the question, and being answered by a calm, loving source for that comfort. So I think that if you were to do that, it would strengthen it even further.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
And as part of the workshop today, we'll be doing an exercise involving our 4 tenets. And so we'll actually be using our 4 tenets to be examining a couple of pieces today. And so that might give you a better idea on how to work with your own writing, whether it is this poem or some of the other ones, to make them stronger, to make them more relatable. So we are looking at 2 poems today, so this might be a really good course for you.
Oh, good. Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. I can't see. Okay, I'm going to leave here.
One of the things I like about what we do here is that when we encourage people to write, we don't put any limitations on who they share it with or if they share it with somebody. So the fact that people are willing to come on and share, I think it's, in some cases, it's a lot of bravery, and then sometimes it's just an opportunity to get some feedback or a critique on your poem, on your poetry, or on your writing. And then, I keep thinking, gee, I've got so much stuff that nobody will ever see. But I think it's really cool that we offer this opportunity for people to come on and share if they want to. But there's no obligation that anything anybody writes in our workshops ever gets shared. But it can if people want to.
Looking at the time, we'll be getting started here in about 8 minutes. So if you need to grab some water, do a bio break, or get anything else before the workshop starts, now is the time.
Debbie, you can come on back in and share your poem if you'd like. I saw that you had another one.
I think that was Lacey clicking the wrong button and bringing back an old text. But if Lacey does, or if Debbie does have something else she wants to share, she is more than welcome to come back on.
So that's another thing that makes us unique. We bring along our own technical difficulties.
me to do that.
Unfortunately, I don't think that's what makes us unique. I think that's rather universal towards everybody right now figuring this stuff out.
Hey, before we get started, Michelle, thank you so much for your comment. I have not been able to, Facebook's not even letting me respond in the comment section. Last week I read the poem Bird, or yeah, it was last week. I read the poem Bird Watching. And you mentioned that if the context hadn't been given by Andrew, using the naming of birds when tracking people would have literally thought you were looking out the window. And honestly, that's where the poem came from. You guys might see me look off into the distance over my shoulder, but I've got my bird feeders and I've got my birds out there, and I really do love birds. But as we talked about a little bit afterwards, sometimes that zoning out and that complacency can kind of lead you to remembering certain things and kind of like trying to process different things in different ways. So I intentionally wrote that poem with that meaning and that explanation. Part of one of the tenets is, who are you writing this for? It's your audience, right? And so I wrote this poem just as much for veterans as I did for people who are not veterans or civilians. And it's a way to kind of, for me, that poem is a way to bridge the two separate communities. There's still something that can be given or received from having like a myopic view. And it's just, to me, that was part of the challenge of the poem. And it was also a little bit of a pain because while writing poems about service and military, service members often have to like get it checked and reviewed to make sure that they're not giving it away any national secrets or anything like that. And so when you submit it, you have to have a person who's willing to kind of bend their mind around, is this safe to talk about? Is it safe to talk about in what capacity? And I honestly think that can lend to some of the stigmatizing, where people feel like they can't write about things. So there's a lot that went into the poem behind the curtain. So you guys got to get a little bit of a peek in that. And thank you so much for your comment and for the feedback as well. It's pretty cool to hear about it, like people thinking about it even a week later. That's pretty awesome. Thanks.
And we are at time to start, so we are going to kick this shindig off. So with that being said, welcome to the third writing workshop of a three-part series hosted by the Veterans Writing Community, which is myself, Delin, and Lacey. And there is one more member who is not currently with us. He had some family stuff come up. So today we're going to be we're going to be covering a workshop, and the topic will be expressing emotion. Just give you a brief overview. Actually, Delin will be giving you the brief overview. Sorry, you need to stick this.
I was going to say, I'm looking at my notes going, okay, how many of the things are you going to cover? My name is Delin Martineau, and I am a writing instructor at the University of Colorado Springs. And we created the Veterans Writing Community in 2018, and we've been doing a series of workshops. We usually do them live, but because of recent circumstances, we started streaming them, and we've had some really good response. The last couple of weeks have been really great. So we appreciate everybody tuning in and giving us such great feedback, not just on the poems that we share, but also with the exercises and the things that we give you to think about. The Veterans Writing Community helps to inspire people to think about different ways to approach personal writing. Sometimes it's about trauma or difficult experiences, and sometimes it's not. But as Nadia was saying a little earlier, sometimes it helps to write about traumatic experiences in a non-traumatic way because it helps you process them a little bit differently, and it helps you address some things that you may find difficult. So that's part of the reason we do what we do. We have different themes because they help us focus our efforts. This week, as Andrew explained, we're going to be doing one on expressing emotion. And we're going to have a couple poems that we're going to share and talk about. We do also have a couple of free spaces in StreamYard. So if there's anybody who would like to join us on camera for this, you're welcome to do that. And if you can pop in and pop out if you would like, but just let us know. Lacey is our technical director today. She's handling all of the behind the scenes stuff. So just pop us a note in the chat if you're interested in doing that. And I'll let Andrew handle the rest of the housekeeping.
All right. So for those who do come into the StreamYard chat, if you could just make sure to keep your mic muted when you're not talking, that way we can prevent any feedback and any audio problems with the stream. Also, please make sure you have some pen and paper nearby. While we are broadcasting this over a computer and you have a computer you can type on, what we find is that you write different things when you have pen and paper than when you use a keyboard. So what we recommend is that you write it down on paper first, and then you go and you type it next. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in chat whenever you have them. Lacey will be monitoring chat, and she'll notify us when she needs to interject your comments. She's going to be your face and voice, so if you need something to say, or if you have something to say, just type it in chat, and she will relay it to everyone. As a brief recap, last week we covered, if I can find there we go.
Clarity versus ambiguity.
Yeah. Last week we covered clarity versus ambiguity, and the two pieces we looked at for those is War's Kind by Stephen Crane and The Soldier's Creed produced by the United States Army. And we took a look at how language can make something clear or unclear, and a little bit of why you might want to have your writing be unclear, like what kind of effects that has on the reader. Today's theme is expressing emotion, and we're going to be looking at how expressing emotion in poetry works in part. We're going to be taking a look at the 4 tenets, and we're going to be taking a look at 2 different poems, Do Not Go Gentle, Into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas, which we have looked at previously. And we will also be looking at It Feels a Shame to Be Alive by Emily Dickinson. And we're going to be looking at those 2 pieces through the lens of our 4 tenets. So today we're going to start by having a 5-minute warm-up writing exercise, and we're just going to write for 5 minutes, and then we're going to get into our discussions. So Lacey should be posting our prompts into chat, and then once those are all in there, I'm going to start a 5-minute timer, and we're going to write for 5 minutes, and I will give you a 1-minute warning so that we know when our time's about up.
And on a quick note, just wanted to say thank you to Nadia's fan club for showing up. We appreciate you.
All right, now that she has all of those posted in, I am starting our time now. And there's about 1 minute left. Go ahead and finish up the sentence you're on, and let's call it there. All right. So, as I mentioned earlier, today we're going to be taking a look at "Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night" again by Dylan Thomas. And so, would you paste that link? And so Lacey's pasting that link into chat right now, and we're accessing that from poets.org. Poets.org is one of my favorite poetry websites. So if you like poetry and you're looking for some good authors, just go crawl around there. You can find some really good stuff. But today we're going to be taking a look at this poem, which we've looked at previously through the lens of our 4 tenets. And hang on, I'm trying to fix myself. All right, so again, first I'm going to read the poem, and then we're going to look at it through our 4 tenets. Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright. Their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sung the sun in flight, and learned too late they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death who see with blinding sight. Blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. So, briefly, before we really dig into this thing, I'm going to repeat the 4 tenets, and then we're going to look at each one of the 4 tenets, or we're going to look at the poem in the terms of each one of the 4 tenets. So the first tenet is, who are you writing this to, and who is your audience? The second is, will your audience understand everything you say? The third is the story all there, or are there parts you left out? And the fourth one is, why are you writing specifically about this? So with Do Not Go Gentle in That Good Night, who is Dylan Thomas writing this to? He wrote the poem about his father's death, but is this a poem written directly to his father and imploring his father to rage against the dying of the light? Or is this a more general poem to all of us, using his father as a platonic ideal for it? And so he's telling all of us to rage against the dying of the light through his father. And so what do you guys think? And I am asking Lacey, I am asking Delyn, I am asking Nadia, I'm asking all of our viewers who are on Facebook and can't directly chat with us. But who is Dylan writing this to? Is he writing this to himself? Is he writing this to his father? Is he writing this to us? So what do you guys think?
I'd like to think he's writing it to everyone because it's such a relatable topic. Anybody who's ever experienced loss knows it's not easy to let someone go and they want them to fight. So whether he was writing it to cope with the loss of his father or just help others to relate to what he's feeling, I like to think he was writing it to all of us.
Okay. Nadia, sound like you had something you wanted to chime in with?
Always with this poem. I think that it's such a dynamic one. And it's dynamic because when you shift it, when you reframe it just that little bit, it seems to take on a completely different meaning. I know that it's written to cope with his father's death. Do we know that if his father has already passed, or if he hadn't at the point of this poem, or is it kind of like...
That's actually something I want to look into, but I know it was written around the time of his father's death. I believe, but I'm not 100% sure, that it was written as his father was passing, but had not yet died.
See,
100%.
I think that that's something that's important to me, is the timing of this poem in determining what the audience is, right? So if it's written as his father is dying but has not passed yet, then these are really encouraging words, maybe negatively encouraging, but how you talk with people and it's like, are you just going to give up? Are you just going to do this? Are you just going to, like, I feel like that's what that poem is saying in addressing the audience of his father. But if it's not his father, if it's reminiscent of the fact that his father had passed and reminiscent of all of those emotions and that coping of loss and grief, I feel like it's advice, like Lacey was saying. I feel like it's advice to those who are, to not do this in the future, because this is what I've seen in the past. And because we don't know, there's always that joint thing where you start off with one topic and then you kind of shift off into another, that comes, Andrew, like you were talking about with that relationship. Maybe he started off talking with his father, and then maybe he got filled with that emotion and was able to really talk about it and relate it to himself, and relate it to others. So I'm curious about when the poem was written, just for those contexts.
So I looked it up, and
Okay.
his father was dying when he wrote the poem, but he didn't die until several months after it was completed.
Oh, it definitely sounds like the fighting words then that are encouraging somebody to continue, go on. Like,
Yeah.
And if you look at the first line of the last quatrain, and you, my father, there on the sad height, it kind of implies that he's still alive. And so to me, this does feel like Dylan is talking to all of us through his father.
mm-hmm.
And so he's using his father's death as a way to rage himself against a general dying of the light. So moving on a little bit, will your audience understand everything you say? So either this was written directly for Dylan's father, or this was written kind of more universally. But either way, do you think that the audience gets Dylan's poem? And it's it's more than do they just get the words, all right, he's talking about death, but do they necessarily get it? You know, there's a difference between saying, yeah, the poem is talking about one thing and actually understanding what that poem is talking about. So do you think that the audience, whether it be Dylan's father or whether it be us, because we might be Dylan's audience, do you think that there's enough in this poem, Do Not Go Gentle, for us to truly get it? Go ahead. And it looks like you got something to say.
I don't want to dominate conversation. I let me get my words together before I respond.
Okay. So for me, I don't know, because on the surface, I definitely get the it's about death thing. But for me, this is one of those poems where the more I dig into it, the more I get out of it. So I don't know if that was intentional. I don't know how intentional something like that can be, where you can build in these layers upon layers upon layers. But I don't think I get this poem, like I said, because every time I dig into it, I get something else out of it. But I connect with it. Emotionally, I feel it. But there's a difference between emotionally feeling something and actually being able to process it. So does that give you enough time to kind of get your ideas together?
There we go. There's a tab. So it does. And I think that, I mean, the the only person who really knows what a poem is about, like really, like why the poem was written, the context under which it was written, the history of, you know, the writer themselves and their experiences, is the writer. And I also, there have been a number of poems that I have read that I just do not get. And it might be that the writer wasn't writing for me. Generally, if you're writing for an audience, you want to make sure to like determine who your audience is down to a very specific level, so that way you can talk with and you can level with that audience. Sometimes you might have those like one of the poems that I wrote, like I might be addressing veterans and I might be addressing civilians who, you know, who can use a metaphor to bridge the gap. I think that in this case, I think that Dylan Thomas really wrote to express their emotions, express his emotions, and then also really, I feel like it was just a diffusing, like it was especially Dylan, since he said that his father was dying as he wrote the poem. Like sometimes you are just, sometimes I'm just moved to write poetry for the sake of it, for like as a way of expressing, like some people do boxing, some people go for a run, other people swim, some people sing or make music or create, other people destroy, and they go to one of those crazy break rooms where you can take a bat to a computer monitor. But for me, my expression is through poetry, and sometimes that just has to happen in order to really cope and work through whatever level of trauma you might be experiencing. So I hope that answers your question, Andrew.
It does.
And Michelle says, I'm in awe of people who can figure out poetry.
Yeah, I was gonna talk to that. People sometimes are afraid of poetry because they see these great poems and they think, oh my gosh, I'll never be able to do that. But if you just try, that's all it takes. You know, I mean, great poets become great through practice. And a lot of times it is talent too, but it's also just writing and writing and writing and writing and writing. So I guess I want to encourage people to try writing poetry as a form, especially if you've never tried it before. today there are so many different iterations of poetry, prose poetry. I mean, there's no wrong way to do it, really. So I guess just get out there and do it, especially if you've got something traumatic like Thomas was trying to deal with. You just get out there and write about it.
Michelle said, "Good point, Dylan. I feel like good poetry is wasted on me trying to read it." I don't think that that's at all accurate.
You know, for me, reading and writing poetry is kind of similar. At least it was in the beginning, because I would look at a book of poetry and I would just be amazed at how a poet could get that many words, impactful words on a piece of paper, and then fill a book full of it. I'm like, how? And it wasn't until I started writing it that I understood practice. It's hard work. It's writing something and not coming back to it for 3 or 5 years and then finally being like, I got to get this finished, and just doing it. And reading poetry is kind of the same way. You don't get good at reading poetry, and so you read a lot of poetry. It's the way it is.
I think that when we seek to write poetry and what is good poetry and what is bad poetry, it's just like it's just like people who don't like specific condiments on a sandwich. You know, some people might be like, oh my gosh, this is the best quality ever that I've ever had, like, you know, for ketchup or curry ketchup or mayonnaise or something like that, right? But other people don't want that on their sandwich. And that's the thing. Art is not supposed to cater, I feel, art is not supposed to cater to every single person. But those who look for the appreciation will get it. It's really important also to note that if you are not a practiced writer like we're talking about, you know, but you want to write, remember that when we're going through elementary school, we learn about words. What are words, right? And then as we progress, we learn about how do you put words together in a way that makes sense. And then we progress in high school to things like style or candor or voice. And so I really think that you need to give yourself some slack and cut yourself some grace as you are learning to write, because remember that you're taking an entire language, and sometimes in transliteration you're taking more than one language to blend it into poetry and make something for an audience that you specify. So sorry, I'm very passionate about the subject.
No, I definitely feel you as well. We do need to
I'm sorry. We had one more comment. Penelope said, "I agree that the poem has layers, and he may have written it for the sake of it. To me, it reads like a passionate poem in regards to fighting against death. But what throws me for a loop is actually hearing Dylan Thomas read the poem, because when he reads it, it's almost melodic."
I was going to suggest that. There's a little YouTube video that's about a minute long that has Dylan Thomas reading his own poem. And so just search for it, you'll find it. And it really does give that extra, he has so much emotion with it, and there's so much, he uses pause as a tool as he reads it. It's pretty amazing. So, yeah.
All right. Well, we do need to move on. So we're going to skip the last two tenets for Do Not Go Gentle so that we can move on to the next piece, because this is one that I want to dig into a little bit more. So the next piece we're going to be looking at is It Feels a Shame to Be Alive by Emily Dickinson. And I think Nadia kind of mentioned this a little bit before. This is a poem I'm not really familiar with. This is a poem that I haven't figured out whether I like it or not yet. This is still kind of new and fresh to me. So while I think it definitely fits our workshops, I don't even know if I like it. So take that for how you will. And we are accessing this poem from the clarebartmuseum.org website. It Feels a Shame to Be Alive by Emily Dickinson. It feels a shame to be alive when men so brave are dead. One envies the distinguished dust permitted such a head. This stone that tells defending whom this Spartan put away, what little of him we possessed in pawn for liberty. The price is great, sublimely paid. Do we deserve a thing? That lives, like dollars, must be piled before we may obtain. Are we that weight sufficient worth that such enormous peril as life dissolved be for us in battle's horrid bowel? It may be a renown to live. I think the men who die, those unsustained saviors, present divinity. So, kind of new, probably the first time a lot of you guys are seeing this, but looking at the four tenets, who do you think that Emily Dickinson was writing this to? Do you think she was writing it to herself? Do you think she was writing it to a specific person or persons? Do you think that she was writing it for her era or just for people in general? What do you guys think?
So I cheated and looked at the little context that's below the poem.
Okay.
Definitely cheated. So the poem itself, if you haven't had a chance to look at the blurb, it was written in 1863 as the Civil War raged, and the poem discusses the themes of guilt, battlefield death, and the sacrifice of those who went south to fight for the Union cause during conflict. So I think that this is a poem. Now this is the point where I'm not reading any more of the blurb because I just get nosy. As far as the poem's concerned, I think it really does speak a lot, and I get really big feel of survivor's guilt for the people who've passed away fighting for a cause, but then also a little bit of a feeling of helplessness, not hopelessness, but I do get a feeling of helplessness because there are all these people who are dying, and I mean, to use a least graceful term that was alluded to in the poem was stacks of bodies, people who have passed on that are not able to get medical care. Like, is there something else that I can do with what I have right now? So to me, while I might not necessarily be a fan of the poem's meter and all of the em dashes in it, oh my goodness, there's so many. It's hard to read, right, Labasi? Like, it
is, but it's fun.
That was not fun.
Honestly, it's some of the exact qualities that you're pointing out that you don't like it, that I like it for. Because I like the em dashes. I like the slant rhymes. I like the almost meter.
Well, so here's the other thing is that nowadays it's considered slant rhyme, right? Because this is a word that is not spelled the same at the end of it, right? For a rhyme. It's not directly like for us. Oh my goodness, let me pull it back up. And scroll. Where it's die and divinity, right? For the last stanza, your die and your divinity are your end, and almost slant rhymes. But remember that people write with different accents and different dialects as well. And at that point, during the 1860s, you had so many, you had all the accents and dialects that we have now. So because it doesn't rhyme to us now, doesn't necessarily mean it didn't then. Yeah. It's a really interesting thing to think about. And when you hear different people read it, you hear that it rhymes in different ways.
And I don't want to get too far into specific techniques, but since we've been talking about what a slant rhyme is, a slant rhyme are two words that almost rhyme. So die and divinity, or die and divinity, they kind of have this rhyme to it, but they don't quite. And so a lot of times poets will use them either to kind of make a poem feel kind of awkward, like this does, instead of having straight rhyme, it has that slant rhyme. Or they'll use it in place of a rhyme. And so they'll have a series of rhymes and they'll have this slant rhyme to kind of throw the reader off. And it's just a poetic technique that I think is fun. But like I said, I don't want to dig too much into specific techniques. So looking at the next thing, the next tenet, will your audience understand everything you have to say? And my personal take on this is no. just because it is a kind of complex poem. Like, it has those M dashes in there. It's formed in a way that's kind of awkward to read, but then at least now, if it is supposed to be a universal poem and we are supposed to be its audience, I think that there are concepts in here that we don't natively connect with now. That's my personal take. What do you guys think? And Delynn and Lacey, feel free to chime in as well.
Was it that got you to I did that twice and I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll just
Sorry.
I don't know. I think that there is a certain amount of survivor's guilt, but if we remember that Emily Dickinson spent the majority of her life locked in a room, and she self-sequestered, she had a lot of, I think she was probably experiencing a lot of the same types of anxieties and things that we might be dealing with as we put ourselves in isolation through the pandemic. I know when I was completely isolated, I went probably almost a month without leaving the house, and I can't imagine doing that in one room. You know, they would feed her under the door, you know, so so not wanting to experience that, but then being able to express these things, this breadth of emotion and beautiful descriptions of landscapes and people and emotions. It's just amazing. You know, it just makes you really want to get to know her as a person, to try and delve into that depth that's there. But it really kind of helps you contextualize this poem too. Makes you really think about, okay, well, maybe she really does feel that survivor's guilt because she wasn't out there in the thick of things like so many people felt like they needed to be. So.
And I would think when an author writes something like that, it's, I guess, trying to get people to fundamentally understand what she's talking about, even if they haven't experienced it themselves. I would think that the author's trying to get people as close to that emotion as she possibly could.
So, kind of riffing off of that and looking at our next tenet, is the story all there, or are there parts that Emily Dickinson left out? And there's a difference between telling the whole story and just including more facts. So, is the whole story that Emily Dickinson is trying to tell here, or is there more stuff that she could have added? Not more facts, not more words, but is there more emotion, more content, more things to make you ponder that she could have put in? Or is it all there? Does this give you a complete picture, or a complete enough picture? What do you guys think?
I think that it really does. As critical as I am of against the form, just because I don't particularly, it doesn't vibe with me too well. I think that it really does encapsulate everything that needs to be said and wants to be said. I really feel like if this were, I mean, some of Emily Dickinson's poems are only 2 stanzas long or only a couplet long. Like, I mean, she really does figure out, you know, how much she wants to say about a topic. And I feel like when I look at this poem, can I take any of the stanzas out? And for this, each stanza addresses a different aspect of it. It enriches the theme, and it doesn't repeat itself. So to me, I think it says everything that it needs to say, even if I don't like the dashes.
I I know how you feel. It is hard to read. I think it's fun to read in part because of those M dashes, but totally lost my train of thought. Dang it! Hate that.
We had a comment from Michelle. She said, "I think I need the Cliff Notes."
I can understand that.
Sometimes poetry is like that, where it's like, you know what, I'm just at a loss. Give me some breadcrumb somewhere, you know. But again, it's kind of, that's why I like the context, and that's why I like looking at the history of when poems are written, is because it gives me just that little bit of a breadcrumb of where the author was. But of course, it's always fun to daydream first, you know, and so you figure out how can this poem relate to me before knowing that context. It's pretty cool to do it that way too.
So, moving on to the last of our tenets, why did Emily Dickinson write this? She wrote this poem for a reason. Why did she write this? I mean, she's locked in a room anyway, and she's like getting fed underneath the door. She's not really seeing people ever. What does she care? Honestly, like, why does she care if there's thousands of people dying outside of her building if she's just going to stay cooped up in her room? So why is Emily Dickinson writing about this?
It makes me wonder how many people that were close to her actually went off to fight. I do wonder about that.
That's an interesting point. That's one I hadn't thought of. It could have been an emotional family or friend connection. I also don't think that just because she was locked in a room means she's incapable of gratitude. Doesn't mean that she's incapable of knowing what goes on beyond the door. And just because we are scared and we choose to compartmentalize, maybe physically in her case, doesn't mean we care what's going on in the outside world. It just may mean that we're not capable of dealing with it ourselves. And so, to me, this poem says that she deeply cared about the events that were going on in her world, and her own problems just prevent her from going out and dealing with them herself. She can't make a physical contribution because something is keeping her physically compartmentalized. Anybody have any other thoughts?
We should write.
All right.
I don't think we have time for 10 minutes, but I think we do have time for 5 minutes at least.
All right.
So do you want to do 5?
Let's do it.
All right. So get out your paper and pencil again. And think about some of those tenets. We'll go over them again before we leave today, but think about those and think about what you got out of the poems, and then think about those prompts too. Lacey will post the prompts again in the chat so you can see them. And just remember that the prompts are there if you need them. You can write about whatever you want, but just in case you need them, we'll have them there for you. And I'll start the timer right now. Got about 1 minute. And that's 5. So finish your sentence. And then I always recommend setting it aside, closing it, setting it aside, and then not looking at it for at least 24 hours. and kind of letting it settle in your brain for a little while. And then when you go back and read it aloud to yourself and see what it sounds like. Remember, nobody has to see anything that you wrote unless you're ready for somebody to see it. And a lot of times the writing that you see from people is multi-drafts later. And what originally comes out in a first draft like that, like a sprint draft, that's what we did today. A lot of times the writing is really rough, but it doesn't matter because that's not the draft that people usually see. So I just want to review the 4 tenets real quick, and then talk a little bit more about how to proceed on with your writing from today. So the 4 tenets again are: who are you writing this to? So think about who your audience is, because thinking about our audience can shape how we write things. They shape our vocabulary use, our sentence structure. And it also shapes our purpose. So if you write without an audience in mind, that can help you lose focus and sometimes get you off track. So think about your audience. Think about the second tenet, which is, what will they understand everything that you say? So once you understand who your audience is, use language that they can relate to. Think about how their understanding of you or of your experiences can change once they read what you've written. And really, you should only be vague or unclear if you're doing it with a reason behind doing that. And if you're having a hard time describing details of something that's really emotional or very traumatic, you might choose to be deliberately obtuse. Just, maybe you want to write about birds instead of writing about about other things that may be more difficult to deal with. That's okay. But otherwise, write so that your audience can clearly understand you. The third tenet is the story all there, or are there parts that you left out? And sometimes it helps to draft a story like a timeline in the order that you remember it. But sometimes it helps to focus on the emotions around certain events. And so you might think about, rather than trying to recall everything that happened, recall the emotions and how things made you feel. Certain memories may come to you. We don't remember in a sequence. So writing in a sequence sometimes can be kind of counterintuitive. It's okay to leave parts out if they are hard for you to process, or if you think there's too much detail or things that your audience doesn't need or wouldn't understand to help get your point across. But think carefully about what you do want to include, and more importantly, why you're including something or leaving it out. The last tenet is, why are you writing about this particular thing? And that has to do a lot with the Greeks' notion of kairos, or the opportune moment. What is bringing this to the forefront of your mind right now? Obviously, Emily Dickinson was dealing with some feelings that she had about people in the Civil War. And so thinking about it in that kind of a context helps us understand her kairos. But your kairos, you may be writing about a particular event, a memory, or emotion that you've written about before, but you may be writing about it again because maybe things come back to you a different way. You might be reminded of a series of events or something that bears more description or elaboration. Something triggered you, something triggered your recall of this information. So pay attention to your feelings and write about things as they come to you. It's really hard for us to stop our busy lives and take time to write things down. But just like eating right or exercising or working out, it's all a habit that we need to get into if that's something that you really wish to develop. People are born with certain talents, but they really get good at it with practice. There's not one sports enthusiast who isn't great at their sport without practicing. Same thing is true with writing. So as we leave, I want you to think a little bit about this. If you have 15 or 20 minutes when we're done with our broadcast here, I encourage you to take about 20 minutes to do another sprint, and a really long one this time, especially if you've got an idea that you just took that first 5 minutes to think about, and then maybe the second 5 minutes to kind of develop a little bit. Really flesh that out and get it on paper so you can really think about it. Or we gave you 3 prompts. You maybe had 2 that you were interested in writing about, but you only addressed 1. So we encourage you to think about that. Yeah, and that's why we put a timer on it, Michelle. That's a thing. We're all terrible at giving time to writing. And so one of the things we like to do is if you set your timer and you say, I'm not going to get up from this table until I am done with that 20 minutes, then you don't have to worry about a word limit. And you don't have to worry about having a finished product. You just have to worry about that time elapsing and not stopping until you're done. And that really helps. Isaac Asimov did that, and he was one of the most prolific writers of our era. He would sit down in front of a typewriter and he would say, I'm not going to move for 8 hours. And then whatever comes out, comes out. I don't think I could do it to that extreme, but you can also think about developing your writing in stages. What you draft in a sprint is just a crappy draft that you can then do with something with or not do something with, depending on your mood. The sprints are only there to get you started, but you can think about, okay, do I want to develop this into an idea? And I think Nadia put into the chat some of the things that she does to help develop her own writing. Sometimes she moves it to the computer and works with it there. Sometimes she works with it other places. I've even taken a piece of writing, like I took last week's sprint and I spoke it into a Word document. And so then later on I can go back through and see if there's something in there, a little nugget in there that I want to work with. But writing can take a lot of different forms. It can start as a sprint of an idea and then later become a poem or an article or a blog post. Or you can just close it and put it in a drawer. Stephen King was really famous for doing that. He would write things down on a yellow legal pad and shove them in a drawer in his desk and then write about something totally different. And then 6 months later, he would pull it back out and take a look at it and see if it was worth rethinking. But remember, you don't have to share any of your writing unless you want to. If you do want to share your writing, if you're interested in having some of us take a look at it, please contact us through our Facebook page. We'd be more than happy to talk with you about it and see if there's something that bears another set of eyes. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. And we really appreciate your time, your questions, your comments. And please let us know if there's any topics you'd like us to cover in future broadcasts or anything else that you'd be interested in talking about. We also like suggestions for pieces too. Oh, good. We like to be helpful and inspirational. That's the point. So thanks again, everybody. We appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us. Bye.